are calling. The curtain is drawn. How far we've fallen. I'm out on the run. Live in the violence. Die by the sword. Deep in the fire. That's where darkness is born.
Hello, everyone. I am back. I took an unplanned hiatus that I didn't want, nor did I foresee. My kiddos and I got hit with a sickness so severe that I actually had to use sick days for being sick. Normally, I reserve those for when I need a mental health break or if my kids have something at school, but this time I actually had no choice. My husband was out of state working for 2 weeks, and during the first week, my kids and I were taken out by some kind of virus. It was like high fevers, body aches. I don't know. I didn't test or any of that crap. I was sick. After literally 9 days, I finally get them back to school. And the next day, I had full-blown norovirus. It was so bad. I had to call my mother-in-law. It was like 4 or 5 a.m. I was on the bathroom floor. I had to get my little girl to get my phone and bring it to me on the bathroom floor, where I called her and asked her to come get my kids because I literally couldn't stand up. And both my kids were sitting on the bathroom floor with me, just peppering me with questions like, "What are you doing? Why? Mommy, what are you doing?" They're going to be scarred for life. And then later that afternoon, my daughter throws up at school. And then my mother-in-law started throwing up. And I spent the rest of the week in survival mode, just trying to take care of sick kids while I was sick myself. And that's something nobody prepares you for before you're a parent, like how grueling it is to be sick and have to take care of sick kids at the same time. Now, even worse, my son won't stop telling every person we see that mommy threw up on the floor. He's going to need therapy, I swear. So, apologies for the overshare, but recording just wasn't an option during that time. And then I spent the next 2 weeks trying to unbury myself from all my work that had piled up. So, thanks for bearing with me. I got back to work and they did massive layoffs. I thought a few people would go, but it was a bloodbath, which is it's super common in the sector of healthcare I'm in. And my job did survive, but it was just one more thing adding to the chaos. That's my life. And a few people reached out to me and asked me if I had stopped doing the podcast. And that's a definite not an option. It's not going to happen. I have made far too many promises to victims' families, and this show is just truly the tip of the iceberg for me. I have a lot of things in the works. A book, I'm trying to get in connection with the right elected officials to really advocate for policy changes and lobby for military spouse programs and rights and educate on domestic violence and murder in the military sexual trauma. There's just so much work to be done. So I guess the moral of this diatribe is really just please hit that follow button if you're not already following this show. And my apologies if you're annoyed with my truly chaotic episode cadence. Just know that I'm drowning a little bit with 2 kids, 5 and under, and a really demanding job in the corporate world. But rest assured, I'm going to continue to work towards more consistency, and I've got a lot more material and projects. And I really appreciate all the people who've come along for the ride with me and have stayed. I love getting messages from victims' families or fellow survivors who share their stories with me. Domestic violence, and of course, specifically domestic violence among service members and police officers, is incredibly common, and we have to keep talking about it if there's ever going to be systemic changes. The last time we met, I mentioned that I was going to release an episode on the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni drama and all the swirling accusations against him, just echoing common domestic violence tactics. What Justin has been accused of doing while defending himself against the allegations by Blake Lively's camp is something that is often a tactic of domestic violence offenders. And so many of my fellow domestic violence advocates and even some experts have come out and called him out for DARVO, which is essentially when a perpetrator of abuse will reverse victim and abuser and play the victim. So I was going to dive into all of that. And for those new to this podcast, or if you didn't hear it before, just a little tidbit. I actually grew up next door neighbors with Justin Baldoni in Southern Oregon for our childhoods and teen years. And although both our families have moved away, he moved in when I was a kid, and our families lived next door to each other for a decade or two. But initially, I thought I'd share some funny childhood stories and insights about Justin and his family. However, I realized I'm just truly exhausted from the noise surrounding this saga. In the past, whenever I saw an article about Justin or someone from home mentioned him, my first reaction was always just a super nostalgic, like, oh, hey, little Justin Baldoni, look how well you're doing. But this controversy just sucked me in, admittedly, and I was just clicking on every article, so much though that I think it actually like ruined my algorithm. I cannot escape it now. Maybe everyone feels this way and we're all just trapped in this like never-ending unwanted group chat with all the parties involved. But here's the bottom line. I believe that every accusation of sexual assault should be taken seriously, or sexual harassment, while also upholding the principle that everyone is innocent until proven guilty. So often, we either dismiss victims or rush to judgment without all the facts. So rather than me adding my personal opinions about Justin to the mix, I'm going to sit this one out and hope the truth prevails. If Blake is lying, I hope she's exposed. I hope her career is profoundly affected because statistically, false accusations are rare, but people always say women are making false accusations, right? So when they do occur, they severely harm real victims. So if that's the case, I hope Justin's redeemed and that every success and opportunity truly comes his way. But conversely, if Blake is telling the truth and Justin isn't the nice guy I always thought him to be and knew him to be, I hope that all comes to light and he faces repercussions. I have read the bulk of both lawsuits, and so far, Blake would really have to be holding back like some concrete evidence, in my opinion, for many of us to feel like sexual harassment actually occurred. But who knows? Maybe she is. I don't know. But what I do know is that our society tends to crucify both victims and the accused too quick. Let's see where the chips fall and strive for justice on all fronts. I'll talk more about Darvo in future episodes with domestic violence, but today is just going to be a completely different topic than I had planned. When I came up for air after all of the illnesses with my kids and everything, all of the podcasts I were following, like all of my latest episodes, every other one was about Justin and Blake. And I initially thought, oh, I could really bring a unique perspective, sharing stories about growing up next door to Justin. But I just honestly don't want to amplify the conversation any further. So here's hoping the truth sets us all free. I did want to give a few updates on victims that I've talked about here on past episodes. On the Dana Alotaibi case, I had mentioned that there's very little information out there about the status of her ex husband's trial. I was able to actually talk to Donna's mother. She's incredibly kind, and she shared with me that Bryant is still sitting in confinement and awaiting trial. She said the trial date is right now set for July of 2025, and that's actually 3 years since Donna was brutally murdered in traffic on the H3 in Hawaii. Donna's mom said that several factors have impacted the trial date, including the challenge of the fact that a number of witnesses were actually very traumatized by the event. So that's making it hard to line up testimony and depositions and all those matters. She also said that she and her two daughters, Donna's little sisters, are really just exhausted from having to retell the tragic story of Donna's murder and her unborn grandson over and over again. But she did say she wants the story to keep being told so that soldiers can receive more mental health help when needed or discipline when called for, and wives can gain more access to resources and laws can be enacted to help victims. I told her that I would take the torch from her and continue to honor Donna and share her name and not let her be forgotten so she can focus on healing and hopefully lighten her burden even in the tiniest of ways. And I will honor that promise and I'll continue to fight for Donna and victims like her. Now, in talking to Mischa Johnson's mom, they had a memorial for Mischa on February 8th in Hawaii. I actually really hope to go, but it was just something I couldn't make happen. I do hope to make it out to Hawaii for the start of Donna's ex-husband's murder trial. And I want to make one correction. I had previously said that Mischa was killed with an unborn son. It was, in fact, a little girl named Armani Catania. And Mischa's family was really excited for this little girl. I was conflating Donna and Mischa's cases on accident, so my apologies. Mischa and Armani's bodies have still not been found, but Mischa's family was told that forensics have confirmed that it is for sure a homicide case. Mischa was last seen on July 11th of 2024, and by August 18th, her husband, Armani's father, Dwayne Johnson, was officially the prime person of interest. Now, he has just in the past few weeks been officially charged with their murders. I was able to go through some of the text messages that he exchanged with Mischa's family just initially right after her disappearance. Mischa's sister had shared those. And he was actively involved in searching for her initially and playing the part of a very concerned husband. But then he abruptly cut off communication and wouldn't cooperate with anyone at the point he became a person of interest. One thing of note is that he has also been charged with pedophilia, and I saw text between Dwayne and a teen girl where he was trying to convince the teen girl to have sex with him. And the teenager actually declined a meetup saying she knew he was married and his wife was beautiful and she didn't want to be a party to any of that, which how sad that a literal child would have more concern over his wife's well-being. It boggles the mind, and it also speaks to what a lack of care this man had for others. Now, I'm not sure if the communicating with underage girls and perhaps exchanging photos is why he's being charged with pedophilia, or if there is something additional we don't know yet. But either way, what a piece of absolute trash he is, allegedly. Mischa deserved better. Of course, I must add this is alleged. Dwayne has been officially charged, but not convicted. Prior, he was the prime suspect in military confinement with charges pending, but now they finally dropped. And all of those charges include the murder of Mischa, the intentional killing of their unborn daughter Armani, obstruction of justice, providing false statements, possession of child pornography, and distribution of child pornography. Experts say that because Mischa and Armani, their bodies have never been found, it can be much harder for the prosecution to get a guilty verdict. But they have the evidence of the pornography. So that's at least a slam dunk to get this guy locked up, keep him locked up, off out of the public at the very least. The military is still investigating all of this, and an arraignment is pending schedule. But I will keep you up to date on that trial, but may justice prevail here. And one more important outcome regarding the impact of Mischa's murder that I want to share is that there's a new law being brought forth in Hawaii called HB 610, which was recently passed by the Judiciary Committee. This law will establish a cold case investigation unit within the Attorney General's office. Currently, each county in Hawaii has its own cold case unit. Resources are stretched so thin, and too many cases remain unsolved. Since 1965, there have been 2,182 homicides in Hawaii, and 728 of them remain open. That means that over 33% of those cases are open and cold. It's important to mention that Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and Indigenous persons are disproportionately represented among murdered individuals, both in Hawaii and across the United States. This bill will provide additional resources and personnel to assist in local and federal cases, ensuring renewed hope for justice for families in Hawaii seeking resolution for their lost loved ones' cold cases. And I am pleased to share that this new law will be called Mischa's Law. While it's deeply saddening that often such progress really only arises after a horrific crime, it's also crucial to recognize the positive impact that can result from families sharing these tragic events, as much as I can imagine having to do so. It does have a positive impact, and I hope families can take some solace in the fact that even after the loss of their beloved family member, that family member will go on to make changes for many others for years to come. The reason victims' families share their cases, in my experience, and why individuals like me share these stories, it's not to make a family's tragedy another person's entertainment. And I hope if you've been listening to me for a while, you can see that that is not my intention to do that. My intention is always to spread awareness and drive impactful changes so that others don't have to endure the same tragedies or lifelong traumas that victims of domestic violence and families of murder victims endure. People misunderstand true crime as just mere exploitation of victims and their families. And I do admit there's tons and tons of problematic shows and podcasts that do exist that just really glorify murder and exploit the worst days of families' lives. But for me, it's essential that I make this somewhat educational. It's to honor victims' legacies, spread awareness of domestic violence and mental health crisis, and provide resources. And so I am sending my deepest love and support to Mischa's family. Now, on to the next Hawaii case, because there are several, as you all know, as I have gone on about it for months now. There's no shortage of women being killed at the hands of service members in Hawaii. The next woman I want to update you on is Ruby Araceli Tenorio, or her married name Ruby Alcantar. If you are unfamiliar, that's the identity of the woman who was found dead on base at the Marine Corps Base Hawaii on September 1st of 2024. We're in March now. That's 6 months. And the police and military and the media have yet to release her name or her husband's name or her cause of death. 6 months. I found out this information by networking with military personnel and have also confirmed that her husband, Alfonso Alcantar, was there with her when she was found, and he has been held in confinement since then for questioning. He's not been charged with anything at this point. He's just in confinement for questioning, whatever the hell that means. They do have 2 young children who've essentially been orphaned, but I was told by an inside source that Ruby's family were able to come get the children. All alleged at this point, like I said, but I'm angered because the military hasn't even said her name. And I think it's because this is the same base Dana Alotaibi's husband was stationed at when she was murdered. And while they were searching for Mischa Johnson from Schofield Barracks and her unborn baby, Ruby ends up dying, allegedly from domestic violence. So the military very much wants to keep this information from hitting the public, which is unacceptable. And as for the military wife found in a Japanese hotel in October, in zero information released. What I do know so far is that in October, a woman was found dead. I'm going to say this so wrong, but a woman was found dead in a Fukuoka hotel room, and she was the wife of a naval service member. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service is investigating the incident, and so far, the only comments police have shared are that the woman died unnaturally. She was an American woman, and the husband has been taken into custody by the United States military, who is investigating the case, which gives me very little confidence, given their valued property is the service member, and they don't give a shit about wives. But security cameras showed the couple entered the hotel together at around 7 p.m. on Friday, and the husband left alone on Sunday morning. Then a hotel employee found the woman in the room alone and bleeding and made an emergency call. That hotel employee initially thought that maybe the woman committed suicide because she just found her alone and bleeding, but police quickly determined that she was most likely the victim of a crime. They did also comment that she had external injuries. I take that to mean she was visibly harmed, but I don't know how. I don't know if that was gunshot wound, knives, beaten. We don't know that. The police spokesman declined to identify the hotel, but the address given matched the hotel soul. If you have any information about this woman, her husband, or anything else, you can send it to me anonymously on the link in the show notes. Keep in mind, if you use that link, I can read what you write, but I can't respond. So if you want to communicate, it's best to email me at healingwounds13@gmail.com. I will never, ever share a source unless the source asks me to credit them. I did stumble upon one little mention of the woman found in Japan dead. Another woman who's in the military made a post about her death. And her caption and comments were essentially, "Hey, this was my college roommate. She's been with this man for like 20 years. None of this makes any sense." And that just made me think, I really want to remind you, it's crucial to remember that people can stay with abusers for decades, especially when children are involved. I had very close friends who I didn't confide in when I was in an abusive marriage, for their safety and mine, for shame, for so many reasons. And even when you want to leave, financial entrapment is a harsh reality. And the second a mother goes to leave, her abusive partner will threaten for custody or file for custody, and it just makes it impossible, right? I know I may sound like a broken record, but please just understand that you may have a very good friend who's been with their partner for years and is actually in a very dangerous situation and enduring a lot of abuse. Never assume that longevity equates to happiness or safety. So, I'm trying to find this woman's name and share her story. I'd like to turn media both onto Ruby's name and the woman in Japan because their lives absolutely mattered, and it's disheartening to see the military attempt to bury these stories. They had a responsibility to keep these women safe, and they're failing women every single day. And instead of admitting the issue and completely overhauling their system, they seem to be working harder to cover things up. If you bring an accusation to the military about a service member, rather than punish the military member, in my experience, and in the experience of so many women I talk to, the military will actively find loopholes to help that service member get out of any real consequences. Sometimes they'll blame alcohol or addiction and send them to rehab to evade real criminal punishment or court martial, or they'll have them go claim that it's their mental health and blame their mental health. Chances are the person needs both mental health help and addiction help, but that doesn't mean the abuse then stops. Many people have addiction, and when they get help, the abuse doesn't stop. The point is, the military will do everything they can to keep their service member unscathed, to protect the military's reputation, and to keep the service members active duty. Women don't matter. Not even their deaths matter. And I think I shared this before, but in the final days I was with my ex husband, one of his colleagues pulled me aside and told me he was afraid I was in danger. And the way he saw my ex behaving and talking, he said, "You got to get out. You just got to get the hell out. The military won't stop him from killing you. They won't help you. They don't care about you." And that hit me really hard because he wasn't a personal friend or someone I really knew, but he knew enough to know my ex was a threat to my safety. And I really valued and appreciated that transparency because when you're in that abusive cycle, you really question reality and your own perceptions. So to hear someone who was really in his camp and on his side say to me and like solidify my fears, I knew it was the end of the road. Now, if you listen to this show solely because you're a true crime enthusiast and are interested in hearing the women's stories, and you're not at all a person who has knowledge of how the military works, you might wonder why I'm so driven to uncover these concealed cases and share victims' stories. And it's because the more the military covers up these incidences that are happening constantly, the less accountability they have. The less the general public have military murder on their radars and know how many changes are truly necessary. Someone once commented under a video of mine, like, why is it the husband's employer's responsibility to protect the wife? And I guess if you have no knowledge of how the military works, that would be confusing, right? It's like if you worked at the bank, you don't expect Wells Fargo to protect the wife. But to me, that just shows a fundamental lack of knowledge or exposure of how the military operates. But when you join the military, you essentially become government property, your spouse and family as well. It is not just a job. The military dictates your entire life. That extends to criminal consequences and punishment as well, meaning it is the military's responsibility to keep their service members in check. So, when people express outrage at the military for not protecting women and wives, both those who serve and those who are dependents, it's because the military has the unique authority to provide mental health support for these men and to help victims access resources for safety, or they can restrict the service member's access to the spouse. And this situation is vastly different from being angry at a company like a bank when an employee abuses their wife. The military has a duty to manage its members, and them failing to do so has dire consequences. Like I said earlier, they'll actively help these members evade consequences. So, in the civilian world, if your husband physically hurts you, stalks you, puts a tracker on your car, harasses you, there are some consequences and actions you can take. But if you're in a military marriage, you're at the mercy of the military. So it's just a different world completely. So let's talk about a new case. Today, I'm going to share the tragic story of a woman whose death brings up something I want to talk more about and something I think about a lot. And that is the tendency of people to hide the realities of war and glorify it all. There's a human cost to war that nobody wants to acknowledge. People realize, of course, that going to combat comes with the risk of death. But not many people realize the collateral damage of war and the havoc it wreaks on the lives of service members far and wide, long after they've taken off their boots and hung up their dog tags. The ripple effect on their families and those who encounter them are just immeasurable. I've spoken in the past about generational trauma and that studies have shown that statistically, the impact of war will go down a service member's lineage for 3 generations. So that the impact of the trauma from war on that veteran will affect grandchildren and great grandchildren who never even meet the veteran who served in combat. But as a society, we don't want to acknowledge the damage. Human nature is of such that we don't want to see or hear the suffering. Out of sight, out of mind. We heroify service members regardless of their behaviors on the home front. We also give them a hero's death, meaning no matter how they die, the military is going to put a bow on it and portray it as a hero's death for their family. And you're going to see that in today's case. Also, a sad reality is there are so many deaths of service members over in war zones that are the results of car wrecks or accidents or faulty equipment or suicides. And a lot of those are made to look like they happened heroically in combat. One of the things a lot of people don't know is that service members have died in the past 2 decades by stepping onto landmines that aren't even from the war efforts that started in 2001 with the United States led invasion. But they're in fact decades old landmines placed by Soviet troops in the 1980s. Since then, thousands of people, Americans, Afghan women, children, all kinds of people really, have been killed or seriously injured by landmines from both the Soviet troops and then those left behind in the period since. Most of those hurt these days are hurt or killed by a range of weapons used and left behind by American forces, Taliban fighters, and Islamic State affiliated groups. That includes grenades, projectile weapons, mortars, cluster munitions, and large bombs that failed to explode as intended, but are still live and prone to going off if touched or moved. Since 2015, casualties from explosive remnants of war and abandoned IEDs have been rising rapidly. But that's not something most civilians safe on the home front realize or even give a thought to. The United States has a long history of covering up what is really going on in war zones. Not because they want to protect Americans from the sad realities of war, but because they manipulate what is happening to support their agenda in whatever way they need to. Politicians are aware that the realities of war, or how they portray it, will affect the way in which people vote. In 1989, President H.W. Bush was giving a press conference about the invasion of Panama, and he was talking to the media and he was sharing a lighthearted moment. He had mentioned how he had hurt his neck and it was affecting his posture and the way he walked. So he was joking and laughing to the media and he waddled around like a duck. However, unbeknownst to the president, at the same time he was laughing and joking and waddling, 3 different news stations had gone to a split screen, and the other portion of the screen was showing bodies from the war of warfighters coming off the plane in flag-draped caskets at Dover Air Force Base. Dover is where all fallen service members are taken for processing, and then a dignified transfer to where they'll finally be buried happens from Dover. But when Americans saw the president joking on half the screen, in tandem with the caskets being transferred, the reaction was a public relations disaster. What would ensue would be a policy that would last 12 years that would decree a ban on media coverage of bodies of U.S. soldiers returning to Dover, which had previously been a national wartime ritual. Americans had taken to waving yellow ribbons and American flags to honor these fallen service members as their bodies were returned home. But after the backlash from the press conference, this was no longer allowed. No videotapes or pictures were allowed to be taken. They were even forbidden. And it was obvious that the politicians were controlling the narrative the public was fed. Because in the past, they'd actually widely broadcast the death of soldiers, and there was even a CIA agent that was killed in Afghanistan, and the media and the politicians had shared his picture and had this big event bringing his body back, really to get people angry about the war and riled up about fighting it. All manipulation tactics. In the year 2000, the Pentagon would announce on the eve of the Gulf War that all military bases were to adopt that same policy that Dover Air Force Base had, and there would be no media coverage of the unloading of caskets. They didn't want any of the residue of war to be seen. In 2009, photos and media were said to be allowed and the ban lifted, but only with the permission of the dead service member's family. The point I am trying to make with all of this information is that America has long covered up the realities of war and the residue it leaves. We often let service members get away with atrocities because nobody wants to badmouth a hero. And that's the juxtaposition I found myself in when trying to seek help from my abuser. The excuses for his behavior were a mile long, and everyone around him enabled him. And there was and continues to be no punishment for men like that. But perhaps one of the most outright appalling things I have seen is when a service member murdered a woman, and instead of calling him a murderer, those around him celebrated him as a fallen hero and discussed how he was one of the 22 fallen soldiers who die by suicide every day. Nobody mentioned his murder victim or celebrated her, despite the fact she was also a veteran. But female veterans, unfortunately, just don't elicit the same responses in people for some reason that's just unknown and unjust. The enablers in this country defended and celebrated the murderer. And so today I want to honor that victim, Madalyn Coulter. Madalyn Coulter, or Maddie, as her loved ones called her, was many things. She was a beloved sister, daughter, mother. I believe her little boy was 5 years old. She was a fiance and a friend. She was also a proud veteran who had honorably served this country herself, as I mentioned earlier. According to Maddie's fiance and her best friends, above all else, she led with empathy for all, which would unfortunately be to her own detriment. Maddie was always that loyal person who would help a person in need, even if it put her in harm's way. If a friend or acquaintance in distress asked Maddie to show up for them, she was going to show up, regardless of their relationship history or if she had a history of conflict with that person. Maddie served as a healthcare specialist in the military from 2012 to 2017, proudly dedicating those years to the service. After separating from the military, she continued her commitment to the veteran community by working for several veteran-owned companies. She took on the role of sales manager at Nine Line Apparel, and that's a veteran-owned company. It's owned and operated. You've probably all seen their shirts out in the public. They have like an American flag and a slogan like, "If you don't like guns or the flag, go fuck yourself." That I'm paraphrasing. That may not be the exact words, but they are obviously very patriotic and meant as a nod to the veteran community and to supporting troops. Now, Nine Line Apparel has a partnership with Black Rifle Coffee, which many of you are surely familiar with. Interestingly, one of the founders of Black Rifle Coffee was my ex-husband's teammate, who I was around quite a bit. When I knew him, though, he was just a 23-year-old, let's just say party enthusiast who loved making crazy videos, and I didn't have the highest expectations for him. However, he has obviously achieved significant success with Black Rifle Coffee. Although I'm not going to delve into further details, but it's worth noting that he has also faced accusations of domestic violence from a well-known celebrity and influencer, and that celebrity was actually the one who shared the story I'm sharing today with me. Right after it happened because it wasn't on my radar yet. So clearly, combat veterans, it's all interconnected, right? Often through a few degrees of separation, and many are familiar with domestic violence and mental health challenges. Additionally, they may possess traits that contribute to problematic behavior. And sadly, when you confront a service member abuser or call them out for bad behavior, their friends often become involved in intimidation and back the abuser to protect them. It's very cult like in many ways. The irony of that is, I really remember my ex husband hating some of his coworkers and fighting with them, but when push came to shove, he would have lied for and probably killed for every single one of them, like an unspoken oath among them. So Maddie worked at Nine Line Apparel for 2 years. And during her time there, she overlapped with another employee and fellow veteran, Zachary Scalf. Zach was the face of Nine Line Apparel in many ways. He also did a lot of co-promoting with Black Rifle, and he appeared in a ton of their advertisements and endorsement videos. A lot of people saying he was the face and doing what some might perceive to be heroic and badass things. Zachary was born and raised in Texas and was a proud Texas A&M alumni. He served 4.5 years in the United States Army 10th Mountain Division, which is infantry. From what I found in research, they specialize in mountain warfare, and their training involved learning to survive in environments that would otherwise kill them. It's an elite division of the U.S. Army. Now, interestingly, Zachary also ran for president in 2020, which to me always seems like a waste of time and money whenever random people do this without huge endorsements. I question their mental health. If they have no proven track record in politics or some public facing career, I'm like, what are you doing? I always think they're either doing it to be ironic or they're just out of touch with reality, but I digress. Additionally, Zachary was the father to two little girls, a fact that really haunts me. You'll soon understand why. Zachary was about 13 years older than Maddie and worked for Nine Line Apparel for 7 years in total. Their employment overlapped for 2 years. During that time, they dated. According to Maddie's loved ones, Zachary was very controlling, trying to dictate everything she did. He acted as if he could do whatever he wanted, but restricted her actions. And I've often observed that abusers seek out much younger women. And listen, while it's possible to have a healthy relationship with a significant age gap, abusive men intentionally target younger partners because they can exert more power over them. And that dynamic was evident in Maddie and Zachary's relationship. According to Madalyn's family, Zachary actually ended things with her, but he continued to try and control her actions even after their breakup. But despite that, Maddie eventually moved on and Zachary moved away back to Texas. Now, Madalyn was happily raising her son, and she had met the love of her life, and she was engaged and expecting a baby with her partner, Blake, who was in the military as well. Madalyn had moved on from Nine Line Apparel and was working for another veteran owned company called Blue Force Gear as an inside sales representative. Blue Force Gear designs weapon slings and tactical gear for military and law enforcement. And Madalyn was reportedly doing great and very good at her job. Now, occasionally, she would still hear from Zach. Maddie was committed and loyal to her fiance, Blake, but it seemed Zach would still try to reach out and maybe even harass her because she'd moved on. And I read a ton of comments on social media from a lot of women who accused Zach of such harassment. Maddie wasn't a one off, and they never are. I even ran a background check on Zachary and found that in 2010, he was charged with assault causing bodily injury to a family member, a felony, domestic violence. And he did have an ex wife accuse him of domestic violence. So, all of these women coming out of the woodwork saying he harassed them, a history of a felony of causing bodily injury to a family member. I mean, companies really should have higher standards for employees who they use as brand ambassadors. Anyways, Madalyn was very happily pregnant with her fiance, Blake. She was working a job she loved and raising her son. She had everything in the world going for her, and she was in such a great place in her life. On the morning of July 12th of 2022, Maddie received some text messages from Zachary saying he needed to meet her and talk to her. It seems like it was very distressing communication because the fact we would later learn was that Maddie had actually basically run out the door and left her cell phone at home. She just jumped in the car and left. And I feel like most moms don't go anywhere without their phones. Like, what if the school calls, that type of thing? Even if my kids are somewhere and I know I'm not needed in the near future, that phone is going to be on in case of emergency. So something must have had Maddie out that door urgently where she forgot her phone. My guess, and this is purely conjecture on my end, I don't know what phone calls and texts look like from Zachary, but I do know Zachary drove from out of state. He was living in Texas and he drove to Georgia and contacted Maddie, and she left her happy home hastily to go meet him. Based on what I've learned about Maddie's character, my guess is it was a very distressed call from Zach. Maybe he even threatened suicide. If you have been with an abuser, this is such a common tactic to manipulate their victims to come see them, to stay with them longer, to meet up with them. I haven't been able to confirm that, but something I want to point out is that it is a tactic. If anybody ever uses it on you, call 911 and report a suicidal person, but do not go to their location. Now, Maddie went to Zachary. For whatever the reason, he needed to see her in an emergent way. So she went to an old friend in distress, and it would be the last thing that Maddie did. That morning, Maddie didn't show up for her shift at Blue Gear, and it was incredibly out of character. So much so that her employer called the police to do a wellness check. The search began for Maddie, and around that same time, Zachary would make a video and post it to his social media platforms. This is heavy. He would make a video and post it, and I am going to play that now. Please be forewarned. It's upsetting how little remorse he feels and how calm he is in this video. There's nothing graphic, but it is emotionally, it's heavy. So please fast forward 45 seconds if you don't want to hear it. And here that is.
I just want to take a minute to say I love each and every one of you, and I'm very sorry. If you know me, you know that I struggle with a lot of my own personal demons, and sometimes we make decisions that we just can't come back from and bounce back from. It sucks. Hopefully this reaches somebody and you'll be stronger than I am. But again, I love all of you. I'm sorry for those that I hurt. I will forever be thankful for all of you that have been in my life.
After Zachary posted this video, he would drive to the parking lot of his former employer, Nine Line Apparel, and die by suicide there. A weird move, right? But actually, I'm going to go off the rails for a minute here, so stay with me. But a college boyfriend of mine died by suicide. He had been a standout baseball player and even drafted by the Yankees. There's a whole other story here on steroids and how they can cause you mental health issues. So that's another one of my passions, is speaking out against steroid use. But this is not why we're here. This is not what we're here to talk about. Anyways, his name was Rob. And I was told that in the hours leading up to Rob's suicide, Rob drove around. He drove around visiting baseball fields before ultimately dying by suicide. And I think sometimes these guys who are ending their lives will visit a place that they were happiest, like one last look into their best life moments. And I know that's where Rob was happiest. So maybe that's why Zach went to Nine Line. I'm not sure. Maybe it was a fuck you to Nine Line. It could have been either or. I'm sure there could be a million reasons. But he was found there at Nine Line Apparel. And Nine Line would immediately start to honor him as a fallen hero, and they were referring to him as part of the 22 soldiers a day. Now, the military has a suicide awareness movement that advocates for veterans using the slogan 22 a day, because some people in the military have shared that on average, 22 veterans a day die by suicide. Now, this has been disputed by some epidemiologists and statisticians from the Department of Defense. I don't know why, since so many people were spurred to join the movement and talk about veteran mental health when they started hearing the number 22. Why would you stop that momentum? But nevertheless, some have denied that the number is that high, and they've stated that it's not even the vets of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, but they could confirm that there's at minimum one suicide a day. And quite frankly, even if it were just one, that's outrageous too. One a day is too many. So, as word got out in small community and special forces and combat service members, this is a very small community. We know that it spreads very quickly, and they started honoring Zachary as one of the fallen heroes of 22 a day. And during that time, Maddie's fiance Blake and her brother Josh were out looking for her. I believe the police or Blue Gear had called Blake looking for Maddie. He was already at work. And so he's like, let me come back and unlock the apartment for you, as they're trying to locate her. When he does this, that's when they find Maddie's phone and realize something is really wrong. And they see messages between her and Zach, and Zachary telling Maddie to meet him. So Blake was obviously unable to get a hold of Maddie and now was aware that something was horribly wrong. So he gets Maddie's brother Josh and says, like, we got to go start looking for Maddie. Going to play a portion of an interview that Blake did where he explains how this unfolded.
So that morning, I left for work, went to work, tried getting a hold of her, and that's when her work called me, and they said, does Madalyn have an appointment? I said, no, she doesn't. I can come unlock the apartment if you need me to. And they said, yeah, that would be fine. They brought a picture with them, noticed the phone that was on the bed. So I called her brother, and I was like, Josh, we got to go looking for Maddie. And that's when it came over the loudspeaker that Zach had shot and killed himself. Now, we probably weren't supposed to hear that.
Right.
But that's how that worked. After that, we jumped in Josh's truck, and we went all throughout Savannah just looking for the car. And we were headed home. Like, we were on 95, got off on the exit, and we were left. And something just came over us, and we're like, we have to turn right. We haven't looked over there yet. And lo and behold, that's where we found her.
I can't even imagine. So you mentioned Zach. That's the guy's name was Zach Scalf. Is that what it was?
Yes, sir.
So he's a guy that was sort of the face of Nine Line Apparel, which is
The thing that baffled me a tad during that interview was that Blake said that they heard over the loudspeaker Zachary's death announced. Somewhere else I read that he and Josh had gone over to Nine Line to inquire about where Zachary was since they knew Maddie went to meet him. So they must have assumed he'd gone there. When they went there, they didn't know Zachary was dead. So when it's announced over the loudspeaker, I assume that's what they meant at Nine Line. That's all I can work out. But of course, hearing this, Blake and Maddie's brother Josh, they realized this is obviously very bad. And then you heard the rest of the story there in that interview with Blake. That's when they would go find her body. Devastating. I cannot imagine the pain of finding your sister, your best friend, your fiance who's pregnant with your child, murdered by a man who had no part in your life. He didn't have a part in Maddie's life other than harassment. He was behind her. He was out of their life. They didn't have a child together. They had no reason for him to come do that to Maddie. He was not a part of Maddie's future. He lived in another state. This man had zero reason to involve her. Now, I want to play another segment of an interview where Maddie's brother Josh addresses the video that Zach posted because I think he says it perfectly. And it's how that video made him feel.
Did you guys see the Instagram video that he did afterward?
Absolutely. I even commented on it, and that's whenever people started reaching out and asking, wait, what are you even talking about? And that's what infuriates us, because in that video, he shows no remorse. He talks about, not being able to take back certain things that you do. And obviously right away I knew exactly what he was talking about. He was talking about Madalyn. And it's infuriating that he's not upset about it. He realizes that there's no way out for him, and that he's either A, going to have to kill himself, or B, rot in prison. And he chose A. And I just think it's so unfair that he had the chance to say his goodbye to the world, and even let the world, think that he's this hero and he's a 22 a day, when in reality he's just a coward who couldn't face his consequences.
Well said. Well fucking said.
So one of the most problematic parts of Maddie's death is that her death didn't really hit the news in Georgia for about a week. So in the meantime, the discussion surrounding Zachary's death was really one offering compassion for a fallen service member who was suffering from PTSD. Nobody was talking about Maddie, who was also a veteran. And it's like that community there, they're very ingratiated into the veteran community. Did they not talk about Maddie's death because that means they'd have to acknowledge that this hero killed her? Now, Nine Line Apparel was specifically attacked by people for not speaking out immediately and specifically for not vilifying Zachary. And I'm not really going to add to that because they're suing other people who've done that. So make your own judgment. Here's what I will say. People are afraid to speak out against the veteran community in any form. That's why you're not going to find many podcasts like mine vilifying veterans, because you excommunicate yourself from all of them. You become an enemy, even if one of your goals, like mine, is to shine a light on the need for veteran mental health and to advocate for them. In doing so, I'm also shining a light on the men who are sick, additionally, the men who are just bad men, and the shortcomings of the military. Nine Line makes its money off of the veteran community and those who idolize them. If they were to have drawn attention to the murder that Zachary committed, they'd be, in a sense, biting the hand that feeds them. They make money off those military supporters, so they didn't. Even worse, many people openly defended Zachary's actions, saying, well, he was a sick veteran. But guess what? There's a lot of men out there with PTSD who don't drive across state lines with a weapon, track down an ex-girlfriend, murder her, and then post a perfectly calm video with no remorse and no emotion. That wasn't a man snapping from a traumatic brain injury. That was a man who wanted power and control. That was a man with a long history of abusing, controlling, stalking, and harassing women. And one of the things that made me mad was seeing people defending his actions. So eventually there was a public outcry from people who finally started hearing about Maddie and realizing that this man, Zachary, was being celebrated, not completely called out for being a murderer. And Zachary's own mom posted the following comment underneath the video he posted on social media about senselessly murdering Maddie and her child. Zachary's mom's name is Deborah. Deborah said, with today being the last day of Suicide Awareness Month, I have come to a point where I'm able to say a few things. I want to thank those who left encouraging and loving comments here by message, Facebook, cards, and calls, both before and after my Zach's death. Many of you continued to check on us even when you were denigrated for mourning him, and I thank you for every contact made. There were also those who felt the need to post hateful comments, and in those I can only say that you didn't know my son and chose to believe untruths. Zach was not a coward. Zach was not evil. He was a man that proudly served his country, then spent the following years working to help fellow veterans. He spent 16 years trying to live with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. His life will not be defined by his last acts. I hope that many of you will keep happy memories of him in your heart. As with any suicide, we cannot know what brings someone to the decision to end their life. All we can do is listen and above all, love them without judgment and pray for their peace of spirit. Okay, damn Deborah. I am trying not to go too hard on Deborah because I did just read that Deborah actually died a year ago in March. So the thing is, my problem is, I understand she's a mother who loves her son, but show me an abusive man and I'll show you a mother who enabled him all along during his abuse. Maybe not in this case. I don't know him personally, but the thing is, this comment just doubles down on what people are upset about. People were mad that everyone was giving Zachary a free pass for murder and nobody was saying Madalyn Coulter's name. That's exactly what Deborah did in that comment. But this was premeditated, and we would later find out he also called his ex-wife and tried to get her to meet him too. Thank God she didn't. I don't care that he did good things in his life. This is what I will remember him for. All of the people saying he was a good man who made a mistake, no, he wasn't a good man. Even if he did good things, a history of violence against women negates that. And then the murder of a woman and an unborn child negates that. You can't dismiss those horrors. Good people can have bad moments, of course. We're all human. We all make mistakes. But a person who stalks and harasses and assaults women and murders one, I don't care if every other day of his life he was volunteering at a hospice, feeding the homeless, and reading to sick puppies. It's all negated. This act is too evil. I don't care if you had a good experience with him when you were friends. Guess what? Some people liked Ted Bundy. If a priest molests children, I don't give a fuck if every other day of his life he did things to make the world a better place, all negated by heinous acts. And that's what I think of men like Zachary. And I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings. Actually, no, I'm not. Women are getting killed all the time by men who can't handle being rejected. We have to call them out. Madalyn Coulter was an incredible human. That's who we should be talking about and celebrating. By all accounts, she was always smiling, had a wonderful sense of humor. She had a fantastic work ethic, and she would literally do anything for a friend or a person in need. Zachary Scalf may have needed help, but he was not in distress when he drove across state lines to murder a little boy's mother and her unborn baby. He was doing evil. If you want to celebrate a veteran, celebrate Madalyn. Female soldiers are treated so poorly, and they deserve every single accolade and every ounce of respect that we give male soldiers. Maddie's family will never recover from this. Maddie's fiance and friends will forever feel her loss and forever wonder why this person had to take away a woman who had nothing to do with his life. Now, I often like to share quotes from Brene Brown because she just has so many that are so powerful to me. And I saw this quote of hers that said, "Empathy is a strange and powerful thing. There is no script. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's simply listening, holding space, withholding judgment, emotionally connecting and communicating that incredibly healing message of you are not alone." From every friend, family member, and coworker who have shared thoughts on Maddie, she embodied this type of power, the ability to provide a safe place for those around her, even those who didn't deserve it. Now, most people who received a call from a person who had hurt them, a person who had tried to control them, who had harassed and stalked them, that call, no matter how distressing, would probably elicit a response of, at minimum, apathy and most likely anger. But not from Madalyn. Maddie had a heart of gold, and it was possibly her greatest gift and yet her Achilles heel. She was loved by so many because of that big and beautiful heart. And in the end, it's what would lead to her death. A person with a heart as beautiful as Madalyn's couldn't have predicted that her act of kindness would be used against her like that. I don't know. Maybe she did know she could be in grave danger. But knowing that, she went anyways because she was selfless and she was called to a former friend in need. She deserves so much better. So Madalyn, we thank you for your service. We honor you for your bravery, for your empathy, for your unwavering dedication to your friends and family, for your love of country and commitment to the veteran community, and for your never-ending kindness. The world is a darker place because you are not in it. And I, for one, will never let you be forgotten. May you rest in peace. If you're a veteran struggling with your mental health, please dial 988. Thank you for listening. Please stay safe.